In this tutorial, you're going to learn more about Python strings. So I've defined this course variable and set it to Python for beginners. Now, earlier I told you that you can use both single and double quotes to define a string. But there are times that you have to use a specific form, otherwise you're going to run into issues. Here's an example. Imagine we want to change this string into Python's course for beginners. So we want to add an apostrophe like this, Python's course for beginners. You can immediately see this is going crazy because our string starts here and then terminates here. All these characters that we have after the second apostrophe, Python interpreter doesn't know what they are. So to solve this problem, we need to use double quotes to define our string so we can have a single quote in the middle of the string. So let's change this to double quotes. Now you can see it adds another double quote to close it. We have to manually remove this. And also one more time at the beginning of the string, we need to add another double quote. Now you can see the error is gone. So if we print course, we see Python's course for beginners. Beautiful. Now let's say we don't want this apostrophe here. So we have Python for beginners, but we want to put beginners in double quotes. Once again, if you add a double quote here, Python interpreter gets confused because it assumes this second double quote indicates the end of our string, so it doesn't know what these characters are. So to solve this, we need to change our double quotes to single quotes like this, and then we can add double quotes in the middle of the string. Now let's run this program. There you go. So we get Python for beginners. So these are the cases for using single or double quotes. Now, in all the examples I've shown you so far, we only deal with short strings. But what if you want to define a string that is multiple lines? For example, what if you want to define a string for the message that we send in an email? In that case, we need to use triple quotes. So let me delete this. Now we add 3 quotes. So 1, 2, 3. There you go. So we have 3 quotes to start our string and 3 to terminate it. Again, these quotes can be single or double quotes. Okay. Now with this, we can define a string that spans multiple lines. For example, we can say, "Hi, John. Here is our first email to you. Thank you, the support team." Like that. Now, let's run this program and here's the result. So we get this beautiful multi-line string. Now let's change this back to something simple so we can look at other characteristics of strings in Python. So I'm going to use single quotes and set the course name to Python for beginners. Now here we can use square brackets to get a character at a given index in this string. Let me show you. So to get the first character, we use square brackets and type 0. So the index of the first character in this string is 0. In other words, this is how Python strings are indexed. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. So the index of the first character is 0, the second character is 1, and so on. So let me delete this and run this program. We get P. We can also use a negative index here, and this is one of the features that we don't have in other programming languages, as far as I know. So with a negative index, we can get the characters starting from the end. So if I pass -1 here, assuming that 0 is the index of the first character, -1 is the index of the last character. So when we run this program, we should see S. Let's run it. There you go. We get S. If we pass -2, this will return the second character from the end. Let's run it one more time. Now we get R because that is the second character from the end. Okay. So pay close attention to this square bracket syntax because quite often it's the topic for online Python tests or university exams. So if you're preparing for a Python test, make sure to watch this tutorial one more time and understand exactly how this square bracket syntax works. We can also use a similar syntax to extract a few characters instead of just one character. For example, if we type 0:3, Python interpreter will return all the characters starting from this index all the way to this second index, but it does not return the character at this index. In other words, back to these indexes. So we have 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on. When we run this program, Python interpreter will return the characters starting from index 0 all the way to index 3, but excludes the character at index 3. So when we run this Python program, we're going to see Pyt. Let me show you. So I'm going to delete this line, run this program. There you go. We get Pyt. Now here we also have default values for the start and end index. So if we don't supply the end index, Python will return all the characters to the end of the string. Let's take a look. So run this program. There you go. We get Python for beginners. But if we change the start index to 1, this will exclude the first character. So when we run this program, we see YTHON. So P is removed. Okay. Now similarly, we have a default value for the start index. So if we don't supply the start index, but add an end index like 5, Python interpreter will assume 0 as the start index. So let's run this program. There you go. We get PYTHO. Now, what if we leave both the start and end index? Well, I told you that in this case, 0 will be assumed as the start index, and the length of the string will be assumed as the end index. So with this syntax, we can basically copy or clone a string. In other words, if I define another variable here, let's call it another, and set it to course square brackets with just a colon, now this expression will return all the characters in the course variable. So this second variable will be a copy of our first variable. Let's take a look. So let's print another and run our program. There you go. We get Python for beginners. So once again, this square bracket syntax is pretty important. If you're preparing for online Python tests or college exams, make sure to watch this tutorial again. Now here's a little exercise for you. I'm going to delete all this code, define a variable called name, and set it to Jennifer. Now when we print name of 1:-1, what do you think we're going to see on the terminal? I want you to use your knowledge to tell what we're going to see on the terminal without running this program. So pause the video, think about it for a few seconds, and then come back, continue watching. So this expression will return the characters starting from index 1, which is the second character, all the way to the first character from the end, but excluding the character at this index. In this case, the first character from the end is R, so R will be excluded. In other words, we're going to see all the characters starting from E all the way to the second E. Let's take a look. So I'm going to run this program. There you go. This is what we get. And I hope you guessed it right. In this tutorial, we're going to look at formatted strings in Python programming language. Formatted strings are particularly useful in situations where you want to dynamically generate some text with your variables. Let me show you. Let's say we have two variables, first name and last name. So first, we set this to John, and last, we set this to Smith. Now, it's better to call these variables first name and last name because they're more descriptive. But here I'm using shorter names because I want you to see the entire code on the screen. So let's say with these two variables, we want to generate some text like this. John, in square brackets, Smith is a coder. Let's say we want to print this on a terminal. How do we do this? Well, we define another variable like message. Now here we add the first name. Now we need to concatenate this with a string that contains a space and a square bracket. Next, we need to add the last name. Then we need to add a string that contains the closing square bracket followed by is a coder. Okay, so then if we print message and run this program, we see John Smith is a coder, right? Now, while this approach perfectly works, it's not ideal because as our text gets more complicated, it becomes harder to visualize the output. So someone else reading this code, they have to visualize all these string concatenations in their head. This is where we use formatted strings. They make it easier for us to visualize the output. So I'm going to define another variable, let's say MSG, short for message, and set this to a formatted string. A formatted string is one that is prefixed with an F. So F quotes. Now in between the quotes, first we want to add the value of the first name variable. So we add curly braces, and here we type first. Next, we add a space, we add our square brackets. In between the square brackets, we want to display the last name. So once again, we add curly braces and type last. And finally here we type is a coder. So this is what we call a formatted string. With these curly braces, we're defining placeholders or holes in our string. And when we run our program, these holes will be filled with the value of our variables. So here we have two placeholders or two holes in our string. One is for the value of our first name variable, and the other is for the value of the last name variable. Now compare this formatted string with string concatenation. With this formatted string, we can easily visualize what the output looks like, right? Now let's print this on the terminal to make sure we get the exact same output. So let's print message. There you go. So John Smith is a coder. So to define formatted strings, prefix your strings with an F and use curly braces to dynamically insert values into your strings. In this Python tutorial, I'm going to show you some really cool things you can do with Python strings. So let's start by defining a variable, course, and we set that to Python for beginners. Now to calculate the number of characters in this string, we can use a built-in function called len. So len, we give it this course variable, and then we can print the result. Let's run this program. So as you can see, we have 20 characters in this string. This is particularly useful when we receive input from the user. For example, you have noticed that when you fill out a form online, each input field quite often has a limit. For example, you might have 50 characters for your name. So using this len function, we can enforce a limit on the number of characters in an input field. If the user types in more characters than we allow them, we can display an error, okay? Now, this len function is another function built into Python. It's a general purpose function. So it's not limited to counting the number of characters in a string. In the future, when we look at lists, I'm going to show you that we can use this function to count the number of items in a list. So it's a general purpose function. Now, we also have functions specific to strings. For example, we have functions for converting all these characters to uppercase or lowercase. To access these functions, we use the dot operator. Let me show you. So first we type course, then dot. Look, these are all the functions that are specific to strings. Now, in more accurate terms, we refer to these functions as methods. This is a term in object-oriented programming that we'll look at in the future. But for now, what I want you to take away is that when a function belongs to something else or is specific to some kind of object, we refer to that function as a method. For example, here we have this function, upper, for converting the string into uppercase. Now, more accurately, because this function is specific to strings, we refer to this as a method. In contrast, len and print are general purpose functions. They don't belong to strings or numbers or other kinds of objects, okay? So this is the difference between functions and methods. Now, let's look at this upper method. So let's print the result and run our program. There you go. We get all these characters displayed in uppercase. Now, note that this method does not change or modify our original string. In fact, it creates a new string and returns it. So if we print our course variable right after we call the upper method, you can see that our course variable still has its original form. So let's run this program one more time. There you go. Look, this is our original course variable. It's not modified. Now, similar to the upper method, we have another method for converting a string into lowercase. So let me show you. Print course.lower. Now let's run the program. So on the second line, you can see all characters are in lowercase. Now there are times that you want to find a character or a sequence of character in a string. In those situations, you can use the find method. So let me delete these few lines. We call course.find. Here we pass a character, let's say P, and this will return the index of the first occurrence of that character. Let me show you. So let's print the result. We get 0 because the index of the first capital P in our string is 0. As another example, if we pass a lowercase o here, Let's see what we get. We get 4 because the index of this O here is 4. Now, note that the find method is case sensitive, so it's sensitive to lowercase and uppercase characters. As an example, if we pass an uppercase O here and run this program, we get -1 because we don't have an uppercase O anywhere in this string. Okay? We can also pass a sequence of characters. For example, we can pass beginners with a capital B. Let's run this program. We get 11 because the word beginners starts at index 11. Now, we also have a method for replacing a character or a sequence of characters, and that is called replace. So let's change find to replace. Let's say we want to replace beginners with absolute beginners. So we add a comma to pass a second value to this function, or more accurately, this method. We add a string. Here I'm going to pass absolute beginners. Okay, now let's run this program. So we get Python for absolute beginners. Again, this method, like the find method, is case sensitive. So if we pass beginners all in lowercase, this method is not going to find this exact word in our string, so it's not going to replace it with absolute beginners. Let's take a look. So I'm going to run the program one more time. Look, we still get Python for beginners. We can also replace a single character. For example, we can replace capital P with, let's say, capital J. Now, when we run this program, we get Python for beginners. So these are the find and replace method. And one last thing I want to show you in this tutorial. There are times that you want to check the existence of a character or a sequence of characters in your string. In those situations, you use the in operator. So let's say we want to know if this string contains the word Python. We can write an expression like this. String Python space in space course. So we're checking to see if Python is in the course variable. Now, this is an expression that produces a Boolean value, like a true or false. So we refer to this expression as a Boolean expression. Now, if we print this on the terminal, we should get true. And by the way, let me delete the second line. We don't need it anymore. So run the program, we get true. But if I change this capital P to a lowercase p and run the program, we get false because we don't have this exact sequence of characters in our string. Now note that the difference between the in operator and the find method is that our find method returns the index of that character or sequence of characters. But the in operator produces a Boolean value. Do we have this or not? So that's the difference. Now let's quickly recap all the cool things you learned to do with strings in this tutorial. We can use the len function to count the number of characters in a string. This is a general purpose function built into Python. We also have specific functions for strings, which we refer to as methods. These include upper for converting a string into uppercase. We also have lower and title methods. You learn about the find method, which returns the index of a character or sequence of characters. We have the replace method for replacing characters and words in a string. And finally, you learn about the in operator. So some characters in a string.